Thank you very much. A bit of a tall order, apparently, what I'm supposed to deliver here. I was asked to talk about how Europe could help Africa so get their back up. The first thing for me was, well, first of all, why do you think Africa needs any help? Let's turn it around. How can Africa help Europe? And so, therefore, uh, it, spending time there, it's very obvious that there is a distinct attitude change in Africa. So there is uh, an attitude that they want to be taken seriously. The first emoji that were colored, of course, came from Africa, but they were not about sort of the embarrassing, politically correct attempts some other people do to exactly match the skin color, but they're about attitude, about how you approach life and so on. And that's what I want to talk about. At least the West is catching on in that respect. So there is a fabulous spoof that started on Instagram. That's Barbie Savior, very much about refreshing the world with Coca-Cola. And there's all these scenes how this support really can go south. I love the idea of giving segways to these poor little children that go to the well to collect the water so they don't have to walk that far. There's plenty of other good inspiration there, and that's exactly the problem. Africa is really covered with LED lights, solar powered to help those people read at night. Africa has a whole different level in many places already. First of all, what's Africa? It's at least 4 continents. It's 54 countries, North, West, East, and Southern Africa. And there's economic, powerhouses in their own mind. South Africa certainly has a higher smartphone penetration than, for example, Japan, more active SIM cards than people. Nigeria is currently 7th most populous country in the world. It will be 750 million people by 2050. And they are very business sassy. So it's a start, but let's look at this with a grain of salt. For 650 billion euros of GDP, you get all of Africa except the countries I just mentioned, or you get Paris, the economic power. So 60 to 1 in population. So there is some potential to do something there. This is slightly cynical to say where Africa is ahead of the game. Social inequality is an obvious one. Africa and Latin America really lead the chart, but what that leads to is also pretty obvious. I added the numbers according to World Atlas of the 50 most dangerous cities in the world, which all are in Latin America, Brazil leading, and South Africa has 4. And there is this emerging third world country, the US, which is not far behind. So if Europe wants to not end like the US and others, you need to do something about the social inequality. You can tweak with the symptoms. There's oodles and oodles of apps in Africa, developed in Africa, for Africa. For example, the municipality of Pretoria has an app which, by pressing one button, submits your location, the issue, and who you are to the closest police car. Dispatch time is 11 seconds, which is quite amazing. So that exists. There is ATM cards where you have 2 PIN numbers, your regular PIN, and then there is the PIN for emergencies. So if you have a gun to your head and you're supposed to enter the PIN so they get your money, function 1, the amount of your balance is a lot less than it actually is, so they don't get that much. All cameras in the surrounding record the scene, so you have a good picture of who is threatening you, and there's a silent alarm for dispatch, and hopefully the police will be there before the transaction is done. So I could go on with many, many examples, but of course that's lipstick on a pig. That's only fixing the issue, so we need to look at the root causes. Sorry about the quality of the picture. The root cause also stems from the fact that Africa has always been a place of haves and have-nots. Here, the chief is the one that runs the show. All conversations go through him. He owns everything the village owns. And if you are not the chief, then you might have the ambition, but you don't have the education, you don't have the capabilities, and you're just not going to get anywhere with this. It's always been that way. In Johannesburg, a Bentley is nothing special. Actually, in parts of Johannesburg, you would think Bentley is a company bigger than Volkswagen. The interesting thing, and why I took the picture, is that Bentley takes 4 parking spots. So if you have that sense of entitlement because you're one of the haves, then you have a problem. Of course, if you buy a Lamborghini, it's not enough that it's a Lamborghini, you gold-plate it. If you get rid of these haves, you create a real problem. The best is if you create total confusion in the tribe, the village, the country. More probable, however, is that you create a civil war because you took away that guy, and it will take quite a while till the next chief is actually clear. If we look at the have-nots, you have a different issue, that they are basically educated to not have an opinion. This is the wall of SOS Kinderdorf in Nigeria, and I was shocked to see that the mural says, "Pray until something happens." That's what the Western countries teach the African kids. It's like, how are you ever going to get anywhere with this? But the problem is that if you start giving, immediately you assume the role of the chief. That means you take not only responsibility for the person, you take responsibility for the entire life. I work with mining companies. Mining companies know very well that if they hire somebody, they don't just hire somebody and give a job. No, they are responsible for the person's livelihood, the livelihood of their family, and probably an entire village in some other country that lives from that one person's salary. If you are not willing to take this responsibility, you shouldn't start and leave it to the Chinese. If you're willing to do this, you're going to be very well rewarded with the thankfulness of a big group. However, you need to, from then on, for eternity, take care of them, basically. So I could talk about the technical possibilities this weird constellation allows us, and there's plenty of examples, but I think social leapfrogging is something that we can learn from Africa quite a bit. Most important one, women. You just saw these guys with their Bentleys. If you give $1 million to a startup, you better check whether the guy that runs the startup doesn't buy a Bentley for half of the money and then puts up his feet and says, "I'm the chief now, you all work." If you give that to a woman in a startup, it's a very different thing. She wants to build something and looks at the future. There's still so many issues, especially in the Islam ruled states, if you will, in Northern Africa. Why is it that in this village in Ghana, there's 20 boys in school and 3 girls? So plenty of issues, but there is other potential. On the right, that's the parliament in Kigali. Kigali is the only capital in the world where the parliament has more than half women. As a matter of fact, 64%. It has nothing to do with gender differences, because the genocide is 20 years ago, but that's where it had its origin. And women were fed up with it, and if you look at what they're talking about, it's about education, it's about safe drinking water, it's about community service, it's about lowering birth rates. That's the topics that they look at, and that's definitely more future-focused than enriching yourself with mining royalties. One thing you also can learn from Africa is the eagerness of people. Their willingness to do something is ridiculous almost. Comes from the fact that in Africa, people are very optimistic. 2/3 of Africans believe that next year will be better than this year, versus 1/3 in Europe, according to The Economist. So optimism plays a role, but they really want to do things. And if I compare that with Europe, if I want 6 weeks of vacation and go home at 5 o'clock, how I'm going to compete with the people in Silicon Valley that never would even complain that 60 hours a week is totally normal, or to people in China for whom retirement age is just not a topic of conversation. So you really need to learn something about being entrepreneurial. In Africa, of course, it's somewhat easier, but in Europe, if you don't have European regulations, it's equally easy. This is an entrepreneur that actually runs a bank. It's not a blue trash bag, it's a bank at the market in Conakry. I give him a $20 note, that's what I get for it. A whole pack, and if I go to the local market, that's what I can buy. The little noodles come in 1 kilo packs. I break them up into little bite-sized bits in shrink wrap, and that's what I sell, and from that margin I live. But they're all entrepreneurs. There is no red tape, they just do it. And surrounding all that, starting with M-Pesa and the cell phone network, is an amazing technology infrastructure that deals with the interface between virtual and real world, that deals with gamification of this whole thing. And of course, all this runs with Bitcoin, not only because the local currencies might not be worth much, but also because usually the money goes to your family which lives in a different country, and you don't want to pay for the transaction costs, which in this case is zero pretty much. This is a revolution in Africa, which if it goes to Europe, brace yourself, banks, you might as well pack up, because UMO, for example, gives microcredits. The average time for microcredit is 27 seconds for approval. And what they use for that is an algorithm that uses your cell phone usage, your movements, your behavior, and your payment patterns. And from that, they say you get the average of, well, less than $4, which isn't much, but it's enough for a pack of noodles. And once I sold those, I pay back the credit. The same with insurances on the right-hand side. All this is exploding to a point where, for example, Barclays decided to pull out of Africa because they can't compete with this. Old Mutual is totally revamping their business in Africa because they need to totally do this differently. I think this will come to Europe, and I'm not sure what that will leave our banks at, which just sit there and wait. I just got a mortgage. It took my bank 4 months to get me that mortgage because of new EU regulations. 4 months versus 27 seconds. Okay, different amount, I hope. Social, and with social, I do not mean socialistic in the ANC sense, to take the rich people's money and give it to the poor. I mean part of the community. You need to be a member of the community, contribute in your capabilities. Harmony in the community is a currency which is much more important than anything else to people. This is a fantastic example of a geologist I know that left a project in Zambia and wanted to basically sell his moped for $1,000, which is completely impossible in the village. There's nobody that owns that much money. So what he did is a tombola, and everyone can afford to enter for 50 cents. First of all, it was very smart. He got a lot more money than he would have gotten in a usual transaction, but more importantly, the social aspect was essential because the new owner of that motorcycle doesn't own that motorcycle. He administers it for the whole community, which of course all will come to him and want to use it and so on. He has first dibs on it, but his stance in that community is immensely bettered. It doesn't matter whether he's rich because he's a motorcycle. He's rich because he's part of community. Africans understand that social doesn't mean naive. They are very good at getting business out of being social. And that is a very important part of this message. There's a lot of software there as well. For example, Money for Jam is a software that is for people that want little jobs done, you know, run an errand, check some information or something like that. And for the equivalent of €1, you get, say, 10 minutes of work from somebody. It is expected by you to distribute the wealth with others. And so that's something we definitely can learn from Africa. Let me finish with that saying which usually Africans tell to Westerners: you got the watch, we got the time. In Europe, the question is, where do we want to be? Do we want the money to be happy, or do we want to be happy to be happy? Thank you.